My wife cheated on me, but I only learned the reason at her funeral. Have you ever felt like your entire life was built on a fragile pillar of trust? Like you're building a family, dreaming about the future, and then, in a single moment, it all crumbles? I knew my wife had cheated on me. I saw it with my own eyes. But the truth I uncovered only at her funeral made me see our life in a completely different way. Are you ready to find out why her betrayal changed everything? It all started on a typical Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the house. I was sitting in the kitchen scrolling through the news on my phone when I saw her walk past me with her phone in hand, smiling as she quickly typed something. Her fingers moved over the screen with urgency, almost as if she was afraid someone might see what she was writing. At the time, it didn't seem strange. We all spend too much time on our phones. But her behavior began to change. She started leaving the house more often, claiming she had extra work that had never been this demanding before. In the evenings, she became distant. We could sit next to each other, but she was always somewhere else. One day, I decided to see what had her so engrossed. Her phone was lying on the table while she was in the shower. I tried to convince myself that it was okay to check it, that I had a right to know. My hands were trembling as I opened her most recent messages. Last night was amazing. I dream of the day when we won't have to hide anymore. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid she might hear it. I scrolled through a few more messages. There were photos. Pictures of her with a man I didn't recognize. They looked happy, the way we used to look years ago. When she came out of the shower, I was already sitting on the couch, trying to act as if everything was fine. But inside, something had broken. What was I supposed to do? Destroy our family? Confront her? Or silently endure it, hoping it would end on its own? I said nothing to her that evening, but what I saw haunted me. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why was she doing this? I couldn't live in ignorance. Those messages and photos wouldn't let me rest. My mind was flooded with questions, but I felt that asking her outright was too risky. If she was cheating, she likely had a well-prepared story ready to cover her tracks. I decided to uncover the truth myself. The next day, I went to my old friend John, a private investigator. John was someone I trusted. I laid out all my suspicions to him. His face was serious, but he didn't judge me. "Are you sure you want to know?" he asked. "Sometimes the truth can make things worse." I didn't hesitate. "I need to know. I need to see it with my own eyes." John agreed, and within days, he started his work. He tracked her movements, took photos, and documented the times and places of every meeting. I tried to continue my normal life, but every time I saw her smile or heard her say she was going to work, my heart clenched. A week later, John brought me his report. He dropped a thick folder on the table in front of me. My hands trembled again as I opened it. Inside were photos. Her with the same man from her phone. They were dining at a restaurant, walking in the park, holding hands. One of the photos showed them entering a hotel. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But that wasn't all. John handed me another document. The man she was seeing was married. And not just married. He was a well-known businessman in our town, someone powerful and influential. "You need to be careful," John warned. "He's not someone you want to mess with." My heart was filled with rage. I wanted to confront him, to tell him everything, to force him out of our lives. But John was right. This man was dangerous, and I couldn't just challenge him head-on. As I stared at those photos and documents, anger and despair consumed me. But one detail caught my attention. Something about their meetings didn't add up. Why were they meeting so often in public? And why did he look so tense in every photo? Was there more to this than just an affair? I couldn't just sit and look at those photos, letting my imagination paint the worst scenarios. I needed to see it all for myself. John was doing a great job, but I felt like I needed to be there to truly understand what was happening. So the next time she said she'd be late at work, I pretended not to suspect anything. She kissed me on the cheek and left. I put on my jacket, exited through a different door, and got into my car. We lived in a small town, so I knew she'd have to head toward the center. She drove at her usual pace, but kept glancing in her rearview mirror. I guess she might have suspected someone was following her. I had to be very careful not to get caught. Eventually, she stopped at a small cafe. I parked a bit farther away, trying not to draw attention. She went inside, and a few minutes later, the man from the photos joined her. They sat at a table in the corner. I stayed in my car, watching through the cafe window. Their behavior surprised me. They didn't touch each other, nor did they look like a couple in love. On the contrary, there was obvious tension between them. She was speaking quickly, emotionally, gesturing with her hands. He sat there with a stern expression, periodically glancing around, as if afraid someone might see them. A few minutes later, she pulled something out of her purse and handed it to him. It was an envelope. He took it and quickly tucked it into his pocket. What was it? Money? A letter? Why did it feel so mysterious? I felt my curiosity turning into suspicion. When they left the cafe, I continued following them. They got into separate cars and drove off in opposite directions. But now I had more questions than answers. What was in that envelope? What kind of relationship did they have? Why did they act as if it wasn't an affair but something else entirely? When I returned home, my wife was already there, acting as if nothing had happened. But I knew this wasn't just an affair. Something didn't add up, and I was determined to find out what it was. The next morning was like any other. My wife got up before me, made coffee, and casually mentioned she had a lot to do in town. Her tone was calm, and her smile seemed natural, but now I saw it differently. I already knew that this work had nothing to do with her actual duties. She got ready quickly, but in her rush, she must have forgotten her laptop on the kitchen table. I noticed it as soon as I heard the sound of her car door closing. My heart started racing. I had a chance to learn more, and I couldn't let it slip away. I approached the laptop, hesitating for only a few seconds. It was her personal device, but after what I had already seen and suspected, my doubts disappeared. I opened the lid. The screen lit up, and to my surprise, there was no password. She had left everything accessible, as if she didn't care if I found something. Her desktop was cluttered with folders and files. I started opening them one by one, going through documents, photos, and emails. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Work files, old family photos, a few vacation videos. But then I came across a folder labeled Private. That was my first clue that something was off. Inside the folder were files with cryptic names: contract, photo report, meetings. I opened the first document and started reading. It was a contract, signed with her name and that of another man. It detailed regular meetings, the exchange of confidential information, and compliance with certain conditions. No specifics were provided, but the tone and wording suggested something serious and illegal. The next file, titled Photo Report, contained the same photos I had seen in John's report: cafes, parks, hotels. But there were additional images: her with this man in an office, holding documents, exchanging money. What was this? Business? Blackmail? I couldn't figure it out. But the file that shook me the most was called Farewell Letter. It had been created just a few days earlier. I opened it, and my hands started trembling. In the letter, she wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I can no longer explain anything to you. I know you hate me, and you have every right to. But what I did was necessary. I knew it could destroy our marriage, but I had no choice. I did it to protect you and our family. Forgive me if you can." I read those lines over and over. Protect me? What did she mean? From whom? Was this just an excuse? My heart was pounding, but I still didn't have any answers. Sitting in front of that laptop, I realized one thing. What I knew was only the tip of the iceberg. Her betrayal was just part of something much bigger. But what was it? And most importantly, could I trust her at all anymore? The words from the letter echoed in my head. Protect the family? No choice? It sounded like she had been involved in something far more serious than just an affair. But what? Dozens of scenarios ran through my mind, each worse than the last. I turned back to the laptop. If this something was so important, the answer had to be somewhere here. I opened her email application, hoping to find some clues. And I did. Among countless work emails, there was a folder labeled Personal. Inside were dozens of messages from the same man I had seen in the photos. I started reading them one by one. The correspondence was formal, emotionless. There were no "I love you" or other romantic expressions. Instead, it felt more like instructions. He gave her directives: meet me at 3 p.m. at the usual place, bring what we discussed. We need to finish this by the end of the month. Her responses were brief: okay, everything's ready, understood. However, one email stood out. It was longer and written in a completely different tone. "You know I didn't want to do this, but you have no choice left. If you don't finish this by the end of the week, everything will spiral out of control. You're risking not only yourself, but also your husband. So do as I say, and everything will be fine." It was like a cold shower. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. What was this? A threat? Blackmail? What was this she had to do? The following emails only confirmed my suspicions. The man was demanding that she pass on certain information: dates, names, financial reports. It seemed like she was working for him. But why? What had forced her into this? And how long had it been going on? Then I came across another file attached to one of the emails. It was a scanned document bearing the name of the company I worked for. My company. She was leaking information about my business. At that moment, rage and despair flooded me. She was betraying me, and I hadn't even known. I know that after yesterday, you can no longer trust me. I know I've ruined everything we built together. But I can't stay here anymore and put you in danger. Forgive me for everything. You didn't deserve this. And please, don't try to find me. This is the best thing I can do for you. Those words crushed me. She was gone. She just left me with all these questions, without a single explanation. But was this really the end? Had she disappeared for good? I rushed to the bedroom. Her closet was half empty. Her suitcase was gone, along with a few dresses and other items I knew she always took when traveling. The bathroom? Her hairbrush and makeup were still there. This wasn't a permanent escape. She just wanted to disappear for a while. But why? Was she afraid of me? Or was she afraid of someone else? I had to find her. I grabbed her laptop again. The emails I had read yesterday were now my only lead. I knew that the man in the photos was the only person who might know where she was. I opened her email and scanned through every message between them. One of them contained an address, a meeting they had scheduled for today. It was a hotel in a nearby town, less than an hour's drive from here. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my car keys and headed there. The drive felt endless. My head was spinning with countless questions. What would I say to her if I found her? Could I forgive her if she told me the truth? Or was this already the end, and all I would get was another blow? When I reached the hotel, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I parked the car and entered the lobby. The hotel was small, quiet. I approached the front desk and described her appearance. "Have you seen this woman here?" I asked. The receptionist thought for a moment and nodded. "Yes, she's here. Room 203. But I believe she requested not to be disturbed." My heart sank. She was here. Why had she come? To meet that man again? Or was this her way of escaping everything? I climbed the stairs to her room. The door was locked, but I could hear movement inside. I knocked, first softly, then louder. "It's me. Open the door," I said. After a few seconds, the door opened, and I saw her. She looked devastated, her eyes red from crying. She wasn't prepared for this meeting. "You weren't supposed to find me," she said quietly, looking down. "Did you really think I'd just let you disappear? After everything?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the floor like someone who had given up. But I knew it wasn't time to stop. If she wanted to leave, she had to tell me everything first. Every last word. She stayed silent, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly. She seemed to be fighting with herself, trying to decide whether to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath, walked over to the bed, and sat down, placing her hands on her lap. Her eyes met mine. There was something different in them compared to yesterday. These weren't tears of fear or guilt. It was a mix of pain and determination. "All right," she said quietly. "You want to know the whole truth? I'll tell you. But promise me you'll listen until the end." I nodded, trying to hide the growing anxiety inside me. "It started about a year ago," she began. "Do you remember the contract with the new partner you signed last summer?" I nodded. That contract was one of the most profitable deals for my company and had secured us stability during tough times. "The man you signed that contract with wasn't who he claimed to be," she continued. "He worked for your competitors. He knew your company was struggling and planned to use that contract to destroy you." My head was spinning. "But how did you find out about this? And why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked down, appearing conflicted. "At first, I didn't know. But then he came to me. That man. He knew about us. He knew about our financial struggles, about our company, about you. And he knew you had signed the contract without realizing it contained hidden terms that would ruin you." "What did he say?" I asked, feeling anger rising inside me. He said that if I didn't agree to help him, if I didn't give him certain information about your company, he would destroy you. He said your partners would abandon you, investors would pull out their money, and our company would collapse. I felt my anger slowly giving way to something else, a mixture of confusion and fear. And you just agreed? I asked quietly. She nodded, and her eyes filled with tears again. At first, I thought I could stop him, that I could find a way to protect you without betraying anything. But he had control over me. He knew where we lived, where we went. He even said he could hurt you, or me. I clenched my fists. Why didn't you tell me? We could have figured out a solution together. She shook her head. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. And even if you did, you would have risked everything. This man isn't just a businessman. He has connections. I've seen how he takes people down. He leaves no trace. And so you decided to meet with him? To give him information? There was pain in my voice. It wasn't a real affair, she said, shaking her head. I never loved him. He just used me as leverage. All those meetings, I only did them to buy time. I was trying to find a way to stop it all, but I was stuck. I froze for a moment, processing her words. Everything I thought I knew about her betrayal turned out to be part of a complex and dark plan. But even now, I couldn't decide whether to believe her. And what now? I finally asked. She took a deep breath. I left because I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I knew you were suspicious, but I was afraid the truth would destroy you. I thought running away was the best option, for both of us. Her words sounded sincere, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. I looked at her, unable to decide. Was her confession the end of her lies, or just another fabrication? But one thing was clear. The man was still out there, and I had to find him. It was the only way to untangle this mess. 2 days after our conversation, I was still trying to process her confession. Her words swirled in my mind, making me question everything I thought I knew about her, about our life, about her affair. We decided to return home, but the tension lingered. Every glance between us was filled with unanswered questions. That evening, I was sitting at the table, staring at her laptop, when my phone buzzed. A message. The number was unfamiliar, but the text made my blood run cold. You're playing with fire. Walk away while you still can. Your wife already knows what happens to those who cross me. My fingers trembled. It was him, the blackmailer, the same man who had destroyed our lives. But how did he know that I knew? Was it just a coincidence? Maybe he suspected she had told me the truth and was trying to keep us in fear. I didn't reply. But a few minutes later, another message came through. Do you want to save yourself and her? Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Hotel, room 405. No police. If you mess this up, it'll be the end for both of you. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. What was this? A threat? A challenge? Or a trap? I showed the message to my wife. Her face turned pale, and she nervously paced the room. It's him, she said. He wants to scare us. Don't go. It's too dangerous. But I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. This man was the source of all our nightmares, and if I didn't confront him, we'd never escape this hell. We don't have a choice, I replied. If I don't go, he'll think we're scared and keep pressing us. I have to do this. She looked like she wanted to stop me, But instead, she just nodded. Fine, she said, but be careful. And promise me you won't give in to his threats. The next evening, as I arrived at the hotel, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The Eastern Hotel looked run down and gloomy, like something out of a crime movie. I climbed the stairs to the fourth floor and stopped in front of the door marked 405. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. The room was dark, with only a desk lamp casting a faint light on a table. Sitting behind it was the man I had seen in the photos with my wife. He looked calm, even confident, but there was a cold threat in his eyes. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I stepped inside and closed the door, trying not to show my unease. You probably know who I am, he said with a smile that only made me more wary. And I know you came here to ask questions. But let me give you some advice. There are things better left unsolved. If you think you can ruin my life and just walk away, you're mistaken, I said, trying to sound firm. His smile faded. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I've destroyed plenty of men like you. None of them were able to stop me. But you, he paused, I'm willing to give you a chance. Give me what I want, and I'll disappear from your life. What exactly do you want? I asked. I want full access to your company, he said. If I get that, I promise you and your wife can move on. If not, well, let's just say there are many ways to make your life unbearable. I looked at him, trying to figure out if these were empty threats or if he truly had the means to back them up. But one thing was clear. Giving him control of my company would be equivalent to suicide. I had to find another way out, and I had to find it quickly. I took a deep breath, suppressing the storm raging inside me. I needed to play it cool. If I showed weakness or emotion, this man would gain even more power over me. I leaned forward, mirroring his posture, and said, Fine, I'm willing to talk, but you have to guarantee that after this, you'll leave us alone. The blackmailer smiled. It was a predator's smile, the kind of smile from someone who knows they've won. I guarantee it. All our problems will be solved as soon as I get what I want. I nodded, pretending to weigh his words. Inside, I was boiling with rage, but outwardly, I remained composed. I need time, I said. I can't just hand over access like that. But if you give me a few days, I'll prepare everything you need. His eyes narrowed. Are you trying to buy time? No, I said, trying to sound convincing. This is business. There are documents that need to be arranged. If I do this the wrong way, it could blow up, and then we'll both be in serious trouble. He leaned back in his chair, seemingly considering my words. Fine, he finally said. You have 3 days. If you don't bring me what I want in 3 days, believe me, your life will become a nightmare. I nodded, pretending to comply, but inside, a plan was forming. When I got home, my wife was waiting for me by the window. Her eyes were filled with fear when she saw me. She rushed to the door, barely waiting for me to step inside. What did he say? She asked, grabbing my hand. He wants access to my company, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. I told him I needed time. She lowered her head, her face full of despair. You shouldn't have gone. He won't stop, even if you do everything he asks. I know, I said. That's why we're not going to play by his rules. Her eyes met mine, a glimmer of hope appearing in them. "What are you planning?" "We're going to make him incriminate himself," I answered. I called John, my detective friend, and told him everything. John wasn't thrilled. "That's risky," he said. "If he finds out you're playing against him, it could end badly." "I don't have a choice," I replied. "He won't leave us alone unless I destroy his leverage." We decided the best option was to record our next meeting. John provided me with a small hidden microphone that I could wear discreetly. His plan was simple: gather evidence of the blackmail and his criminal activities, then hand it over to the police. The next 3 days were spent preparing. Together with John, we went over every possible scenario: what I could say, how I could get the blackmailer to talk. My wife barely spoke during this time, but I could see the guilt eating away at her. 3 days later, I returned to the same hotel. This time, I was ready. The microphone was hidden under my clothes, and in my pocket was a small device that would allow me to send a signal to John if anything went wrong. The door opened, and the blackmailer greeted me with his cold smile once again. "Do you have what I need?" he asked. "Everything's ready," I replied. "But first, I want to know why you're doing this. What do you really want from me?" He laughed. "What do I want? I want power, control. Did you really think you could sign contracts and keep your hands clean? In this world, no one wins without compromises." His voice grew louder, and I knew my microphone was recording everything. "And my wife?" I pressed. "What did she give you?" His face darkened. "She was a tool, a means to an end. Do you think I care about her? She did what she had to do, and now she's as disposable as you are if you don't meet my demands." That was enough. I pressed the button in my pocket, sending the signal to John. The police were already waiting downstairs, ready to burst in at any moment. I sat there, looking at this man, knowing his days as a blackmailer were numbered. But now, the most important thing remained. Could my wife and I rebuild what had been broken? The police burst into the hotel room just seconds after I sent the signal. The door slammed open, and several armed officers stormed in, shouting for the blackmailer to freeze. He raised his hands, maintaining that same cold, confident expression. "Well, looks like you've won this round," he said, staring directly at me as they cuffed his hands. I silently watched as they led him out of the room. My victory felt so close. But as he was being escorted out of the hotel, he stopped, turned his head, and delivered one sentence that sent a chill through me. "I hope you're ready to learn that your wife hasn't told you everything. She's always been a master manipulator." His voice dripped with mockery, and though the police quickly took him away, his words lingered. What did he mean? What secret past could my wife still be hiding? When I returned home that night, my wife was already waiting for me, pacing nervously around the room. Her face was tense, and she rushed toward me as soon as I entered. "What happened? Did they arrest him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I replied shortly. "But before they took him away, he said something I can't ignore." Her face paled, and she froze. "What did he say?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her fear. I looked her straight in the eyes. "That you've been hiding something from me. That you're a master manipulator. And now I need to know. What does that mean?" She turned away, her shoulders stiffening. She stood silently for several seconds, as if deciding whether to tell me more. Finally, she turned back to face me, her eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "but I was afraid you'd never trust me again." "Tell me what?" I pressed. "He didn't just blackmail me." Her voice cracked, and she paused to collect herself. "A year ago, when I first met him, I knew it was dangerous. But he had leverage on me." My hands clenched into fists. "What leverage?" She looked at me with despair. "Before we got married, I did something. It was stupid, reckless, but at the time, I didn't know it would come back to haunt me." "What did you do?" I asked, anger rising inside me. "I signed a fraudulent agreement for one of his companies, which later went bankrupt. It was his business. He used that contract to accuse me of being involved in financial schemes. He had documents that could have sent me to prison." Her confession hit me like a lightning bolt. "You've known this the whole time and never told me?" "I was scared," she whispered. "If you found out, you'd never trust me. And when he came back into my life, I was trapped. I knew he'd use it to destroy us." I took a step back, processing her words. All of this felt like an endless chain of lies. Now I understood why she agreed to work with him. But at the same time, this explanation only raised more questions. I looked at her, trying to figure out whether she was a victim in all of this, or if her past actions had jeopardized our future together. And the most important question: could I forgive her for yet another secret she had kept from me? The days following the blackmailer's arrest were filled with tension. I tried to live a normal life, but every call or message made my heart race. My wife acted quiet, almost submissive, as if afraid to do anything that might provoke my anger. But I still couldn't decide if I could trust her. And then the thing I feared most happened. One morning, there was a knock at our door. Standing on the doorstep were two uniformed police officers. One of them, a middle-aged man with a stern face, stepped forward. "Are you?" he asked. She nodded, her face instantly turning pale. "You are suspected of involvement in financial fraud related to Alpha Corp," he said. "We've received documents implicating you in illegal activities." I froze. These were the very documents she had mentioned in her confession. The blackmailer had kept his promise, even from behind bars. He had handed over the incriminating evidence to the police. The officers presented her with a warrant. "You'll need to come with us for questioning," the officer continued. I saw her hands trembling, but she didn't resist. She just cast a brief glance at me, full of despair. "Everything will be fine," she whispered before being led out the door. When they were gone, I stood at the threshold, unsure of what to do. My mind was racing. The police now had the evidence, and if I didn't act, my wife would end up behind bars. But was she worth defending after everything she had kept from me? And how could I even help her? I called John, the only person I could trust in this situation. "The police? That's bad," he said after listening to me. "If they got those documents from the blackmailer, this could get serious." "What can I do?" I asked. "You could try to prove the documents are fake or forged," he said. "But for that, we'll need to find more evidence of his criminal activities. The police don't always act quickly, especially when it comes to financial cases." "How much time do I have?" "Probably a few weeks," John replied. "But if you want to help her, you need to start now." I decided I couldn't just sit and wait. Together with John, we began investigating everything connected to the blackmailer: his companies, financial records, and connections to other people. The more we dug, the more dirt we uncovered. He hadn't only used my wife. There had been several other victims in the past whom he had either intimidated or coerced into cooperation. One particularly interesting discovery was that some of the documents the police had received from him didn't match the official records of the company mentioned in the case. This suggested they might have been forged. John suggested involving a good attorney who could use these discrepancies as a defense argument for my wife. But there was one problem. We needed to find even more evidence of the blackmailer's illegal activities. At some point, I realized that the only way to get the evidence I needed was to talk to the blackmailer again. I contacted my attorney and asked him to arrange a meeting with him in prison. It was a risky move, but I was willing to take that chance. When I entered the visitation room, the blackmailer was already seated at the table, looking calm and even satisfied. He smiled when he saw me. "Well, how's your dear wife doing?" he asked mockingly. "You know the documents you gave to the police won't hold up under scrutiny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, really?" He leaned forward. "And what will you do if they do hold up?" "I'll find everything I need to prove you manipulated everyone." "You're not going to get away with this," I replied. His grin widened. "Are you sure about that? I've spent years building my reputation, and I always keep a few aces up my sleeve. Think carefully. Are you willing to risk your life and future for someone who betrayed you?" His words sparked anger in me, but I knew this was just another one of his manipulative tactics. When I left the prison, my emotions were mixed. He knew more than I had assumed. But now I was certain of two things. The documents might be forged, and I needed to find a way to prove it before my wife lost everything. The blackmailer's words stayed with me as I drove home. He knew something I still didn't understand, and it felt dangerous. But how was he planning to use it against us? Or was he simply manipulating me to break my resolve? That night, I received an email from the attorney assisting me with the investigation. It stated that the blackmailer had not only handed over documents implicating my wife, but also something allegedly related to me personally. It felt like a lightning strike. I opened the file attached to the email. It contained copies of contracts from my company, signed in my name. At first glance, they appeared legitimate, but one thing immediately raised a red flag. I had never signed those documents. The contracts detailed large sums of money being funneled to offshore accounts, along with illicit financial dealings. It looked as though I had been involved in fraud within my own company. My chest tightened. Now the blackmailer wasn't just trying to destroy my wife. He was coming after me too. He was crafting a story that could jeopardize our future, our business, and even our freedom. The next morning, I went to my attorney's office. He was an experienced man, but even he seemed troubled. "This is serious," he said as we sat at the table reviewing the documents. "If these contracts appear legitimate, the police could launch an investigation against you as well." "But it's not me," I said, barely containing my anger. "I never signed these. They're forgeries." "Maybe," he said, "but proving it will be difficult, especially if he has more evidence." We decided to act quickly. My attorney suggested that the documents might have been created using internal company data, which only someone within the organization could access. This meant the blackmailer might not have been working alone. He could have had an accomplice. The next few days were spent reviewing employee records and access logs to company information. One name caught my attention: Mark, the financial director who had worked with me for many years. He was known for his stellar performance, but recently, his behavior had been odd, taking more vacations, avoiding direct conversations, and seeming distant. I reached out to John and asked him to look into Mark. A few days later, John handed me shocking information. Mark had met with the blackmailer in the past. Even more concerning, Mark had an offshore account that regularly received deposits from unknown sources. It was all starting to come together. Mark was likely helping the blackmailer create the documents to frame both me and my wife. His motives were still unclear, but it was obvious that his actions were no coincidence. I decided to use this information against the blackmailer. With my attorney's help, we arranged another meeting with him in prison. When I saw him again, he looked just as confident as before. "You again," he said with a smirk. "I thought we were done talking." I leaned closer to the table, trying not to show any emotion. "Mark," I said, "your source in my company." His smirk disappeared. He stared at me for a few seconds, trying to gauge how much I knew. "You know I can tell the police everything about him," I continued. "And when I do, your fake story will fall apart." He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh this time. "You think it's that simple? Mark is just one of many. If you try anything, I'll find a way to turn it back on you." "Maybe," I said, "but you've forgotten one thing. You're already behind bars, and I'm still free. I won't stop until I dismantle everything you've built." His confidence started to crack. I now knew we were close to uncovering his entire scheme. But the question remained. Could we prove his guilt before the police officially charged either me or my wife? The last few weeks turned into an endless fight for the truth. Documents, interrogations, and searching for new evidence. It all felt relentless. But finally, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. After another meeting with my attorney and John, we decided to execute a final plan. Mark had played a key role in the blackmailer's schemes, and we knew the police wouldn't be able to ignore evidence of his involvement. John managed to obtain recordings of Mark's meetings with the blackmailer and bank statements from offshore accounts, which confirmed financial transfers between them. These findings formed the backbone of a new report my attorney submitted to the police. Now we had a story that not only cleared my wife's name, but also exposed a large-scale conspiracy within the company, implicating both Mark and the blackmailer. The police conducted a search of Mark's house, where they found additional evidence of his connection to the blackmailer, including drafts of forged contracts and recordings of phone conversations. Under the weight of the evidence, Mark broke down. He admitted to working with the blackmailer to avoid his personal debts and to take a share of the money the blackmailer collected through his schemes. His confession was the turning point. The police revisited the case against my wife and officially dropped all charges. The blackmailer was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for his crimes, including financial fraud, forgery, and extortion. After everything that had happened, my wife and I were exhausted but finally able to breathe freely. That evening, when we received the official confirmation that all charges had been dismissed, she came up to me. "Forgive me," she said quietly, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I destroyed our trust, but I promise I'll never keep secrets from you again." I looked at her, and all the months of pain and betrayal flashed through my mind. But I also remembered how she had risked everything to protect me, even if her actions were misguided. "We've both made mistakes," I said. "But if we're honest with each other, we have a chance to fix this." She hugged me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that we were both ready to start over. We sold the business and decided to start a new life in another city, leaving the past behind. I realized that trust isn't something you can gain or lose permanently. It has to be rebuilt, even after the darkest times. My wife did everything she could to earn back that trust. And while the scars remained, we were ready to move forward together. Sometimes, people do the wrong things for the right reasons. Sometimes, we lose ourselves in an effort to protect the ones we love. But the greatest challenge is learning how to forgive. Is it always possible? Share your thoughts in the comments. Could you forgive your loved one after everything that happened, even if their intentions were good?